I'm Sean Haney, and this is Real Ag on the Weekend. Let's get real and get connected with the week that was in Canadian agriculture. Real Ag on the Weekend starts now.
Hello and welcome to Real Ag on the Weekend here on CJME 980 and CKOM 650. I am your host, Lyndsey Smith, and yes, I am back for another week hosting this show. Your regular host, Sean Haney, will be back next week. He's just taking some well-deserved holidays and getting all of his kids off to college and university. And yes, it is September 2nd. It is back to school. I also think there's a particular football game going on this weekend. Perhaps you can let me know who you figure will take the win. But, well, let's face it, 99.9% of you are going for the Riders. All right. This week's show, we've got quite the lineup. Very market focused, but don't worry, not just grains and oilseeds and pulses. We're going to talk beef markets as well. So later on in the show, you'll hear from Wasko. She's based at East End, Saskatchewan. She's with the Gateway Livestock Exchange, and she's going to join me for the beef market update, which is something we do every 2 weeks on RealAgriculture.com. So we'll hear from her. We'll hear where we're at, not just on market prices, of course, but she's got some data on the cow herd and on particularly on some of the consolidation that's occurring, some of the heifers on feed numbers I'm going to ask her about and see where the size of our cow herd is going. I think we all know that it is shrinking, of course, but just how much? We're going to ask Anne. All right. Also on today's show, you'll hear from Brian Comeault. He's with FBN, and he's going to walk us through the StatsCan data that came out this week. So Statistics Canada did release its production figures for the 2023 crop. Not entirely surprising, but I am going to ask Brian how he feels about some of those numbers, as realistically, it looks like a lot of these production figures, yes, lands us somewhere between 21 and 22. Not as good as 22. Definitely not as bad as 21 overall, but that doesn't, of course, say much for certain areas. So stick around. That's Brian Comeault. He'll be on later on in the show. Now, our first segment that we'll get to in just a few is actually on the Keep It Clean campaign. So I've got Greg Bartley lined up. He's with Pulse Canada. He's going to talk about the overall Keep It Clean campaign and why it matters so much. Now, you, of course, if you're a pulse grower, you probably know very well that there are even registered products that you can't particularly use if you want to keep all your marketing options open, or you may already know that you definitely need to be in contact with your buyers when you're making certain decisions in season. We often, though, also think about the Keep It Clean campaign. Yes, it is at times largely focused on MRL. So that's those maximum residue limits allowable in the final grain product. And one of the issues that we sometimes run into in agriculture, especially in Western Canada, is on glyphosate. So a pre-harvest pass of glyphosate can be used as a pre-harvest aid. Now let's remember, glyphosate is a herbicide, not a desiccant. So a desiccant works quickly and basically dries down everything. Glyphosate is a herbicide, and it will dry the crop down, but it's got to kill it first. So that means it actually has to be translocated within the plant, and it's got to actually kill that plant in order for it to die and then dry down. So usually you're looking at a 7 to 10 day dry down as opposed to a much quicker one with a desiccant. Now, that also matters when we talk about MRLs. So glyphosate as a pre-harvest pass is registered for use. However, it has to be used in a very specific window. So that window is before physiological maturity, because we don't want any of the glyphosate to be translocated to the grain. We asked the question because, of course, glyphosate has come under quite a bit of scrutiny in recent years. There's certainly a lot of pushback to the use of the product overall, let alone in crop. And so we wanted to know what farmers were doing as far as pre-harvest glyphosate passes. So we asked on RealAgriculture.com, usually every week we put up a new poll, and we asked our audience what they were doing with a pre-harvest pass, whether or not it was an increase in use on their farm, a decrease, staying the same, or if it was never a practice they'd ever actually use. So we had nearly 300 growers weigh in, which is a really great sample size. So thank you to everyone who weighed in on our poll. 48% of those that responded said that they were using about the same amount of pre-harvest glyphosate as they typically would. 28% though said that the practice was on the decrease on their farm, and only 5% said that it had actually increased as a practice on their farm in the last 3 years. So I should qualify this all that we asked in the last 3 years if it had increased, decreased, or stayed the same. 19% of those 300 people that responded said that it was not a practice they regularly used on their farm. So fascinating stuff there, and of course does relate to this first interview you're going to hear with Greg Bartley from Pulse Canada, talking about the Keep It Clean campaign. So if that is something that you would like to weigh in on, certainly we had some really great discussions about the practice of pre-harvest glyphosate on our Facebook page. So if you are someone who uses social media, you can certainly find Real Agriculture on Facebook, Instagram. We have a YouTube channel as well. You can find us on X. And we did have a really great discussion about using glyphosate and why you might have changed that practice, or why you might even use it in the first place. And so we definitely heard feedback from people who said, they were concerned about the fact that perhaps it could be detected in the grain, and they didn't want that to be a concern. And so they had pulled back the use. Now, we didn't ask about the use of glyphosate overall, say in your fall weed control, or maybe in spring as a burn off, or in crop, of course, on tolerant crops. This was just specifically about pre-harvest glyphosate as a pre-harvest pass. All right. And this week, if you're curious and if you want to head on over to realagriculture.com, just scroll on down that page and you can actually weigh in on this week's poll as well. So it just went up on the website yesterday, and we want to know if you had to take out a long-term loan today, would you go fixed on your interest rate? Would you go variable? And if you go fixed, would you go 1, 2 to 4 years, or 5 years? I'm actually kind of surprised. So preliminary results, much more mixed than I thought they would be. Now, we did, of course, hear yesterday from StatsCan on the GDP numbers. Canada's GDP was expected to be in the positive. It actually was 0.2 to the negative. Does that mean we're going to get a pause on rates? Maybe. That's what I'm going with. All right. We will be keeping tabs on that, though. Don't you worry. All right. Let's take a quick break here with RealAg on the weekend, and I'll be back with more right after this.
There's a reason we call it the Corn School. Videos on everything from planter setup, weed control, field trial results, yield strategies, and so much more. The Corn School on RealAgriculture.com has the information and advice you need to help you succeed. Brought to you by Pride Seeds and BASF, Corn School episodes are available at cornschool.com, from realagriculture.com, or as a podcast from your favorite streaming service. Download the latest podcast today.
If you're involved in the agriculture industry, it's important to stay informed on all the latest issues affecting your business. At RealAgriculture.com, we offer fast, reliable news, information, and insights to help you keep on top of all of the latest in Canadian agriculture. Visit RealAgriculture.com and sign up for our free daily newsletter covering everything from news, agronomy, animal agriculture, and much more. Visit RealAgriculture.com/subscribe today.
Welcome back to RealAg on the weekend here on 650 CKOM and 980 CJME. I am Lyndsey Smith. I am your host, and we're going to head on over to Winnipeg to speak with Greg Bartley. He's the Director of Crop Protection and Crop Quality with Pulse Canada. How are you doing today, Greg?
Pretty good, thanks, Lyndsey. How are you?
I'm doing well. We have a very important topic ahead of us, and it is the Keep It Clean campaign. And I should hope by now that everyone knows what this is. But just in case, what is the Keep It Clean campaign?
For sure. Yes, I hope everyone knows as well. But if not, the Keep It Clean program is a joint initiative of the Canola Council Canada, Cereals Canada, and Pulse Canada, and the Prairie Oak Growers Association. And it's really all about market access. So the Keep It Clean program provides growers and even the broader industry with resources really for just growing market-ready crops. So what does that mean? Well, we're really just making sure that the crops we grow here in Canada meets the requirements of both our domestic and export customers related to sanitary and phytosanitary issues. So this could be making sure that we meet MRL requirements, making sure that we don't have any disease issues, and things like that. So it's, again, all about market access.
So, and I think most of us probably are sort of most familiar on the Keep It Clean side with perhaps an MRL. So that being the maximum residue limit. So that's, about using our pesticide products on label properly. But it's more than just the MRL, as you mentioned. Like, we could be talking about, disease and toxin levels, those sorts of things. Like, it does go beyond just MRLs.
It does, yeah. Like, I think the main focus or a large part of the program that we focus on is related to MRLs and pesticide use, but it is more than that. When you talk about disease pressures, it's really, there's certain countries that have different limits in terms of their acceptability of disease in that grain being exported to the country. So less of a focus, but it's still very, very important for those markets that do require that.
Now, how did this sort of all come together? What was sort of the impetus for putting together a campaign? As you mentioned, I mean, there's several groups that have come together now to support this program. Sort of, why is it so important? Why did it come to be?
Yeah, so from a Pulse Canada perspective, we really got a wake up to the MRO requirements back in around 2012. This is a case where we had a pretty high profile non-compliance issue with the European Union related to glyphosate on lentils, where there was no glyphosate MRL established in the European Union for lentils. So long story short, that's been resolved, but it really put a focus on our need to pay attention to all of our export markets and the MRL requirements and getting that resolved. So the Keep It Clean program, it's only one piece of the bigger market access picture, especially when we look at MRLs. I like to break this down into a short-term, medium-term, long-term approach. So, we look at all of our export markets. For Pulses, this is over 130 different markets. All those markets have the potential to have a different MRL policy. So we look at those different policies, try to determine which ones are problematic or not. And if we identify that a crop protection product used here in Canada is going to cause a non-compliance in export markets, this is where we start to get into gear and do that short, medium, long-term approach. Short term being Keep It Clean program, just communicating it to the growers and industry that, hey, this is a potential problem. You might need to either avoid using this product or talk to your buyer to make sure that if it is applied, it's not going to that market and goes to a less sensitive market. Medium term, working with that product registrant to get that MRL established and fix it. Can we raise it to a more similar level that we have here in Canada? And long-term approach is getting MRL harmonization right across the board in all of our export markets. So a small piece of it, but the Keep It Clean is a very important piece to this puzzle, where it's really communicating these potential issues at the farmer level to make sure we're not doing things at the farm level that can cause a market access issue.
I think that's a really good point, though, and the way you sort of walk it out from the immediacy all the way through to what's happening at a much larger level, that, there is at times work being done actively to potentially harmonize MRLs so that it becomes less of an issue, which is, I think, a really key point that maybe we don't always think about, but that work is often, ongoing, especially on very specific products or crops and the way they work together. So a really key point that I think sometimes we lose sight of is this is always sort of an ongoing challenge within the industry and something that's worked on. You did mention, though, and this is one of the things that I think, we here at Real Agriculture, sometimes we hear about some of the pushback on, it's a registered product. Why can't I use it? And you did mention, of course, being in touch with a buyer and understanding what some of the restrictions might be. How do you navigate sort of that communication piece of, yes, something may be registered in Canada, but the end use market, perhaps doesn't want it or we can't meet their MRL or whatever it may be? How do you navigate sort of that part of this through this campaign?
Yeah, so it's definitely a difficult conversation. And to be clear, we don't want to be communicating products that, tell a grower that, hey, this is a registered product, but you can't use it due to an MRL issue. Like, it's what we're trying to avoid in the long term. But, the industry here in Canada is really come together to recognize that this is an issue that we need to address as an entire value chain. So working with the grain buyers, working with the growers, working with the life science companies, national commodity associations, we've all come together and we follow, there's actually a policy developed to help guide this discussion through the Canada Grains Council. So it really defines the risk levels in terms of identifying when there's an MRL market access risk, and at what level do you trigger and determine, Kate, you either just can't use this product because the potential non-compliance is that great, or can we manage it through an industry level or at a grain buyer level to divert it to a less sensitive market or not. This gets a little more tricky, if you deal with, the difference between, say, a bulk commodity that goes out in a large ship versus containers. That's a whole another level of complexity that, either makes it easier to manage or less easy to manage. Bulk shipments, there's a lot of blending going on. So you're able to take I wouldn't say take more risk, but you're able to, with the blending going on, it allows product to mix together and reduces that risk level in terms of a single source providing that non-compliance versus a container. Like a container shipment come from a single field. So there is no blending going on. And I think you just see a little more extremes on that end. So we come together as a value chain to discuss this typically in the fall, but, we're always looking at it and trying to determine, is the risk acceptable or not? And can we manage it as an industry, or do we just recommend not to use that product?
Do you ever get pushback on the, this is a food safety issue in not meeting some of these MRLs? Is that ever brought up as a perception?
I wouldn't say so. And this is typically where we like to communicate, the understanding of what MRL is. Like an MRL is not a food safety standard. It's really established to facilitate trade. It's really just to make sure that the crop protection product's been applied according to label directions, in that country. So when we talk about residues and talk about MRLs, in most cases, it's not a food safety issue. The MRL is typically about 100 times lower than any food safety level that you consider to be an issue. So it doesn't really come up in the context of food safety, but it's really just a regulatory level that we need to pay attention to, and we need to make sure that we're following if we're exporting to a country.
To facilitate trade. I like that. That's a great term. So that's, I'll remember that in the context of this, because I think it's important in the way we approach some of these things. Now, I will say, in watching social media and, in communication that come from any of the organizations involved in Keep It Clean, there's some really great resources out there. Do you actively, how does that work as far as trying to reach growers? There's obviously a lot of resources there. There's a website, and we can share that part, but how do you make sure that individual growers are, have the information they need before the growing season so they can make the best decision?
Yeah, this is something that we're always trying to do better at, is make sure that we get the information in front of growers at a timely situation or a timely time in the growing season. So, what we do, and the main purpose of Keep It Clean is really just to package all this information up, whether it's the market access risks or the information you just simply need to know, put it into simple resources and get it out. So again, value chain approach. We'd like to keep it clean. We can't do this alone. So we use all of our partners, whether it's our grower group members, whether it's the grain buyers, or even life science companies. We put a focus on actually working with agronomists directly. So kind of train the trainer type environment, where making sure the information is out there. If you have any touch points with a grower, make sure you're aware of the Keep It Clean messaging and just get it out there, amplify as much as we can. To make sure that it's known ahead of time. So if you're going to apply a pesticide product, it's no use learning about this information after the fact. Make sure you have it at the start of the growing season. You're aware of the potential market access risks. You can have those preemptive conversations with your grain buyers if you need to. And again, working with the full value chain to make sure everyone's on the same page.
And there is a website if you're interested, keepitclean.ca. It's really well done. I spent some time on it in preparation for this interview, sort of looking through. There's some, if you're a visual learner, there's some visuals there, lots of things to read as well. So there you go. You can head there. All right, Greg, thanks so much for this. A super important topic. Really glad that you could join me on the show. And we are, yes, harvest, but we're always looking forward to next year. So, if you've got any questions about it, about Keep It Clean, please head over to that website. So thanks so much, Greg.
Thanks a lot, Lyndsey. Appreciate it.
All right, we're going to take a quick break here on RealAg on the Weekend, and when I come back, I'm going to have Brian Comeault take us through the 2023 StatsCan estimated production for this year's crop.
Canola is more than just a pretty face in the prairie landscape. It's a big business, both here and around the world, that requires you to be informed and up to date on everything it takes to grow a successful crop. The Canola School on RealAgriculture.com has an expert library of video resources covering markets, agronomy, and more to help you grow a healthy and profitable canola crop. Visit canolaschool.com today. Brought to you by BASF Canada and Invigor Hybrid Canola.
The next generation is the future of agriculture, but how do we launch from one role to leading? From succession planning and family dynamics to understanding finances and making the tough calls to discovering paths others have taken all through agriculture, the Successors Podcast covers it all. Tune in with me, your host, Kara Oosterhuis, simply by searching The Successors on your favorite podcast platform, or you can find it by visiting www.realagriculture.com.
Whether you're seeding, harvesting, or anything in between, the Wheat School on RealAgriculture.com has you covered. Timely agronomic information from industry experts available online anytime. Give your wheat crop a good start and a great finish with the Wheat School on RealAgriculture.com. Brought to you by C&M Seeds, Syngenta Canada, and the Alberta Wheat and Barley Commission.
Welcome back to Real Ag on the Weekend. I am your host, Lyndsey Smith. We are here on 650 CKOM and CJME 980. All right, joining me now on the line is Brian Comeault. He's a market analyst with FBN out of Winnipeg, Manitoba. Brian, welcome to the show.
Thanks for having me, Lyndsey.
All right, so StatsCan came out on Tuesday with its latest estimates. First blush, are you surprised at all?
No, I'm not surprised at all. I think there was some pretty big production cuts that were shown, year over year or even versus average on a lot of commodities. And I think the general theme, right, which I think everybody's been expecting, was crops are not as good as last year. They're, not as good as average, but they're better than they were in the 2021 drought year. Mm-hmm. So I think that is kind of the major theme that came across. I think there were some numbers that maybe surprised some people, but overall, I think, 15 to 20% production cuts versus average is kind of what we're looking at overall.
Now, let's focus then in on, there's a few things to talk about, but canola for sure. There were definitely some changes in numbers beyond just production estimates. Walk me through that. Yeah,
so, again, I think the market was pretty comfortable with the fact that Statistics Canada had been underestimating, particularly 2022's crop, I think was kind of the major theme. We kind of noticed through statistics that, there was more deliveries of canola than what, StatsCan had reported there being supplies of. So, we kind of knew intrinsically that there was more canola out there in farm bins than what was expected. So what StatsCan did, though, is they did add about 520,000 tons to last year's crop production, but they also added almost 500,000 tons or 496,000 to the 2021 crop, which would have been the drought year. So there was some production amendments done to the drought year that probably were, not necessarily expected, or at least not to the size that they did amend it to.
Mm-hmm. So now we've been talking, so the canola number came in at 17.56. Where was that in line with where you were pegging it? Is that pretty much in line with what you thought, or are you one of the 16s or one of the 18s?
It was a few 100,000 tons higher than what we were probably thinking. Does
this change in any significant way your opinion on where some of these markets are headed? If we think wheat and canola, let's start there. As far as sort of the overall tone for these markets, does this report change anything for you?
No, I think until proven otherwise, I've kind of been in a more neutral to bullish opinion on canola. Canola made a high back in on the 19th of July. We saw a high in canola. It struggled to come back from that, even as the heat and the yield estimates have declined. I think a lot of that has to do with outside markets too. So we're seeing some influence from the soybean market. We're seeing some influence from the vegetable oil markets as a whole. Canola oil in a lot of the overseas markets was priced really high relative to the other oil seeds. So there's been some demand destruction on the canola oil side. And then we have some even further outside market matters like, the Chinese economy and inflationary concerns and, U.S. central bank actions and things like that have been kind of keeping a lid on commodities as a whole as well. And I think canola gets sucked into that as well. So at this point, I think the high 800s on the future side is probably where we'll trade for a little while. If it does start to creep up above that, up above 850 or 860, that might give us some reason to think that this market has some more fire underneath it. But right now, it definitely seems to be more in consolidative mode in the high 8 or in the low to mid 800s.
And then what about wheat?
Wheat is, generally speaking, wheat seasonally hits some lows at this point in the year. We just came out of the U.S. harvest pressure. We've seen European harvest pressure. We're about to get into the Canadian harvest, but that doesn't really affect markets too much. We did see a positive response on Minneapolis early after the Statistics Canada report. I think it was spring wheat particularly had they were about 1 million tons off. The average trade guess was about 1 million tons off of what was actually printed. So there was a bit of a bullish tilt towards the spring wheat. It is still trading near lows, but it definitely gained some value versus the winter classes today. So there was, a little bit of spreading happening in between the spring wheat and the winter wheats. But seasonally, we generally see lows in futures at around this time or within the next couple of weeks. Even though the fundamentals are a little bit bearish globally for wheat, I think that, this is a supportive Statistics Canada report for spring wheat.
We'll end on maybe the pulses. Certainly hearing some rumblings from, India as far as production going. But we also know that our pulse areas have been pretty hard hit by drought this year. What is, generally speaking, obviously there's differences between pulse types, but generally speaking, how do we feel about the pulse market?
I think the pulses are leaning towards bullish as well. That we're talking about production numbers that are, equal to or even below that of 2021. I'm particularly looking at, lentils came in below 2021's number. So did peas, actually. So both of those are going to be tight going into this market. Peas may have been a little bit looser of an S&D coming into this market. Carryout, I saw some private estimates of carryout at around 500,000 tons or something like that, which is relatively comfortable for peas. So there's a little bit more of a cushion, particularly if there's no demand. And so I think if you think about the demand shocks that could come into the market there, we need China to continue buying. And if their economy is suffering and their buying of feed grains is lower, that might have a bit of a weight on peas. India obviously is having issues with their production. They haven't imported a lot of Canadian pulses of any size for a long time. Is this the year that changes? I suppose there could be some opportunity there. Even a couple of containers or a couple of vessels would probably make a difference and tighten up the S&D. So overall, I think the pulses should be well supported. I think it turns now into a demand story of whether or not the market wants what we have to offer, as little as it is.
All right, Brian, thanks so much for joining me on the show today. This is fascinating stuff. I appreciate it.
All right, thanks, Lizzie.
All right, we'll be back with more RealAg on the weekend right after this. Hi, I'm Lyndsey Smith of RealAgriculture.com. Join me Monday nights at 8 p.m. Eastern for The Agronomists, Canada's only live, interactive, agronomy-based show. Each week, we answer your most pressing questions with a rotating panel of agronomists, researchers, and extension staff from across Canada. Join me Monday nights, 8 p.m. Eastern on YouTube, Facebook, Twitter, or LinkedIn, or head to realagriculture.com/live at 8 p.m. Eastern.
Hi, I'm Bernard Tobin, host of the Soybean School on RealAgriculture.com. Throughout the year, on the Soybean School, we'll bring you timely agronomic video content from planting to harvest, from the latest agronomic research to the latest in production technology. Check out our massive video library on YouTube, RealAgriculture.com, or download the audio podcast versions wherever you get your podcasts. The Soybean School is brought to you by Pride Seeds, BASF, and Syngenta Canada.
Welcome back to RealAg on the Weekend. I am your host, Lyndsey Smith, here on CJME 980 and 650 CKOM. Yes, it is time for the beef market update with Ann Wasko. Ann, how are you?
I am good.
Yeah, let's talk beef markets as per usual. Let's start in the U.S. and work our way north.
Yeah, so markets this week in the U.S. A little bit mixed. In the South, I'd say most of the trade at 179, which will be for the most part steady. In the North, though, a little bit of weakness showing up there, 1 to 3 lower on the live, 182 to 184, while the dress market was off a couple to 290 delivered. So a little mixed, no big surprise. The market still, for the most part, sideways chop on the weighted average, the 5-area average. The cutout this week, it had a nice improvement up to the middle of the month, leading into Labor Day. But now that most of that business is done in terms of buying for that long weekend for the retailers, the choice did lose about $4 this week. It closed last night at $313.80, and the select still sitting about $25 back. So again, none of those I think are surprises. Now, once we roll into September, especially, kind of a month from now, we'll be looking for these markets time to start to shine for Q4, but you can take your breather now. That's how I'd maybe define it. Here in the West, just to finish up on markets, our local cash market in Alberta, $390 delivered. That's up $2, and a little bit of live trade at $231. So kind of a little firmer footing to finish off August here in the West.
All right, and now, as you said, sort of, expected numbers, but looking through this month for things to start to pick up. Is September typically a lull kind of month on these prices? Yeah.
Yeah, totally. So now we take our little reprieve until we get into Q4, where we have some great demand for usually for middle meats. So yes, they're going to be high priced this year. What kind of response happens as we go forward? But certainly we know supplies are going to be on the tighter side as we head into Q4. So looking for that to support the market, and that's how those are the things we'll be watching to see how things play out.
Okay. All right. We did get some StatsCan data for the July 1 numbers. What did those tell us?
Yeah, so this is that mid-year inventory report. If your listeners remember, we talked about the U.S. report a little bit ago. StatsCan released theirs now. So this is July 1 cattle inventory report. And as expected, liquidation in Canada continued through the first half of 2023. No surprise. And then, of course, since this report, drought's certainly intensifying, especially in parts of Western Canada where the cow herd lives. So my maybe warning or kind of a heads up to listeners is that I think we'll see even more so of a response by the time we get around to the next report on January 1st, 2024. But in the meantime, this report showed nationally our beef cow numbers down 1.5%. If you go back and look at even just since 2020, they're down 3.5%. And in the past 10 years, they've dropped 7%. So no surprise. We know what the cow herd's been doing in Canada, and that continued on this last report. Now, the piece of the puzzle that we watch to say when will something change is, of course, has to come from the heifer side, right? Mm-hmm. So beef replacement heifers were down 3% versus last year. They're now down 12% from 2020. Wow. So again, there's absolutely no signs of any retention going on, and until that piece changes, there is, we've got no hope of seeing a bigger herd. So, the writing's on the wall, if you will. Now, the one piece that if you're a cow-calf producer in this country that, you're going to continue, I think, to see strong support on feeder cattle and calf prices is our beef calf crop, down 3% versus last year, down 6% from 2020. And this will be the smallest beef calf crop that in recent history, like for over 30 years. So that's going to keep, that tells that supply story, especially on the feeder side. And I think that's the bottom line as we kind of sum up this report.
Yeesh. So, and of course, prices are good, which is the time when you want to have lots of calves to sell. But this is how things go, isn't it? When you have cattle take a cow or a heifer when she's born, she's not giving you a calf for a couple of years, and then that calf doesn't go to market for 18 months or so. It's a long process or a long supply chain, right? So changes, of course, happen over time. We can't also just immediately change gears. Everything happens over time. So watching that heifer replacement piece, did the cattle on feed numbers tell us more about just how many heifers are going to town?
Good point, Lyndsey. And so for sure, this is something we can watch each month because Canfax reports a cattle on feed report here in Western Canada. So let's just go back and look at, say, for example, in June and July, that Western Canadian heifer placement, so this is heifers going on feed, were up 50% from 2022. Even compared to the drought, what we call the drought year of 21, they were up 25%. So already, and none of this would have been reflected in that StatsCan report yet. So again, clearly, indicating what's going on here in Western Canada in terms of heifers are heading on feed. They are not staying in the herd. And then the other piece, I think, just to kind of round out the cattle on feed numbers is cow slaughter. So nationally, we saw June and July cow slaughter here in Canada up 2% for both months. The preliminary data, and we've got another month or a week to finish for this month, but it looks like August data could be up 16%. So again, all of these things will impact the January 2024 report.
So when there's two things happening here, right? There's no feed. And this is, there was an improvement, let's say, in some areas over 21 for sure. But perhaps some areas this year have sort of slid back, definitely. So we've got not a lot of feed and prices are quite strong. Where's the business case for keeping heifers? There isn't one. So,
I mean, everybody's going to be different. And exactly. You just illustrated there's areas that have had, some moisture and have had some grass and areas that haven't. So, I mean, this is as varied and different as you would expect across the country. So, but having said all that, there's certainly, you've got record high prices occurring. It doesn't look like that train is stopping at all as we head into the fall run and head into 2024. So again, I guess if you're being forced to liquidate cattle, thank goodness we've got record prices to handle that.
Yeah, but definitely some questions about what the next 5 years, 10 years, 15 years looks like for this cattle herd for sure. Okay, let's round off on carcass weights. Of course, tell us a few things. Where are we at on carcass weights as far as up, down, the same, west and east?
Yeah. So good catch as well. We're always watching to say, are our feedlots current? How we doing? Have we got a chance to, rally this market some more? And I think this kind of helped or is showing in this local Western Canadian market with that higher price we saw this week. Bottom line, I think, is in Western Canada, feedlots are pretty current. Overall, nationally, our weights are on steer weights last week were 920 pounds. That's 4 pounds below last year. But what the bottom line is, Western Canadian weights are down, but Ontario weights are creeping heavier. So an indication, kind of just a warning sign, I would say, just watching those weights in Western Canada or in Eastern Canada that are inching higher, and maybe feedlots not quite as current in Ontario as they are, say, in Alberta.
All right, something to watch for sure. All right, Ann Wasko joining us from East End, Saskatchewan. I hope you have a wonderful long weekend and get some of that beef sizzling on the barbecue.
You got it. You too. Thanks, Lyndsey.
All right, that does it for me here on RealAg on the weekend. It has been absolutely tons of fun to host this show for a couple weeks. Your regular host, Sean Haney, will be back next week, of course. You can find this show on RealAgriculture.com. Head on over there. You can listen to this episode and any past episodes over there. And, of course, you can find us on social media at RealAgriculture. Or you can call our feedback line, 1-855-776-6147. Have a wonderful long weekend, everyone. Cheers.